The altimeter reads 8,000 feet when it should read 18,000. A 21-year-old Navy cadet named Jimmy Crawford squints at the instrument panel, certain he's misread the numbers. But the needle doesn't lie. Somewhere between takeoff and the training area, he's lost 10,000 feet of altitude without noticing. His flight instructor's voice crackles through the radio, sharp with confusion. "Crawford, what's your position?" Below him, 6 Japanese Zeros circle in loose formation, close enough that he can see the red meatballs on their wings. They haven't spotted him yet, a lone Hellcat silhouetted against the morning sun, flying at the wrong altitude, in the wrong airspace, about to stumble into the wrong kind of fight. What happens in the next 90 seconds will either kill him or rewrite the tactical manual for every fighter pilot in the Pacific. He has no way of knowing which. November 1944, somewhere over Leyte Gulf, and Jimmy Crawford is about to fall into history. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The waters off the Philippines taste of salt and aircraft fuel. The USS Essex cuts through gray swells under a sky that changes hourly from clear blue to storm black. Her flight deck trembles with the weight of F-6F Hellcats, each one loaded with 6.50 caliber machine guns and enough ammunition to shred a city block. The air above Leyte Gulf belongs to no one. American carrier groups push west into Japanese-held waters. The Imperial Navy's combined fleet has emerged to contest the invasion, bringing with it pilots who learned to fly in the shadow of Mount Fuji, men who know the Zero like a favorite horse. These are not the green replacements of 1943. These are veterans, survivors, the concentrated skill of a dying air force. The morning briefing aboard Essex carries the weight of statistical reality. Combat air patrol flights encounter enemy aircraft on 60% of sorties. The average engagement lasts 4 minutes. Pilots who survive their first 10 missions have a 70% chance of completing their tour. Those who don't have a 0% chance of anything. In the ready room, pilots check watches and weapon settings. Some write letters on carbon paper, thin blue sheets that will either be mailed home or burned with their belongings. The coffee tastes like metal shavings. The air conditioning fights a losing battle against tropical humidity and the fierce sweat of 24 young men about to climb into aluminum coffins and hunt for trouble at 20,000 feet. Flight operations begin before dawn. Deck crews swarm the Hellcats in the red light of battle lanterns. Mechanics check oil levels and ammunition feeds. Ordnancemen arm the guns and verify firing circuits. The ritual is precise, mechanical, born from the knowledge that a loose connection or a missed inspection can kill a pilot faster than any enemy fighter. The tactical situation is fluid. Japanese strike forces launch from airfields throughout the Philippines. Their approach routes vary daily. American radar coverage has gaps. Fleet defense requires constant vigilance and aggressive patrols. Pilots cycle through mission after mission. Combat air patrol, bomber escort, photo reconnaissance, search and destroy. The tempo is grinding, exhausting, and absolutely necessary. Loss rates reflect the mathematics of aerial combat. In October 1944, Task Force 38 aircraft engage enemy fighters on 147 separate occasions. American pilots claimed 312 kills. Japanese records, captured after the war, suggest the actual number is closer to 180. But records also show that 67 American aircraft fail to return. Some are shot down. Others simply vanish, claimed by mechanical failure, navigation error, or the vast Pacific itself. His name is James Frederick Crawford, but everyone calls him Jimmy. He is 21 years old, born in Bakersfield, California, to a mechanic who works the oil fields and a mother who teaches Sunday school. He has brown hair, green eyes, and hands that are small for his height, but steady enough to thread a needle in a hurricane. He joined the Navy in January 1943, 2 weeks after his high school girlfriend married someone else. Primary flight training took place in Corpus Christi, Texas. Jimmy soloed after 8 hours in a Yellow Peril, the Stearman biplane that taught a generation of pilots to feel airflow through fabric and wire. His instructor noted that Jimmy flew by the book, always. He memorized procedures completely, followed checklists religiously, and never improvised. In aerobatic training, he executed perfect loops and rolls, technically flawless, but lacking the instinctive flair that marked natural pilots. Advanced training brought him to Pensacola and the SNJ Texan, a low-wing monoplane with retractable landing gear and enough power to kill careless students. Jimmy adapted methodically, studying weight and balance calculations, memorizing performance charts, practicing engine-out procedures until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. His grades were solid, 87th percentile, but his tactical scores were mediocre. In mock dogfights, he flew defensively, conservatively, like a man afraid of making mistakes. The transition to fighters revealed Jimmy's greatest strength and weakness. He understood the F-6F Hellcat systems completely. He could recite fuel consumption rates at various power settings, explain the function of every switch and circuit breaker, and diagnose engine problems from subtle changes in sound or vibration. But in combat training, he hesitated. When bounced by instructors playing enemy fighters, Jimmy's first instinct was to check his 6, verify his position, confirm his altitude. By the time he oriented himself, the fight was usually over. Flight instructors wrote in his evaluation that Cadet Crawford was technically proficient but lacked killer instinct. They recommended him for transport or patrol duties, not fighter operations. Jimmy requested reconsideration. He wrote a formal letter explaining his desire to fly fighters in combat. The review board, facing acute pilot shortages, approved his assignment to VF-15, the Essex's fighter squadron. They noted in his file that Crawford might prove adequate in the defensive role if properly supervised. Jimmy arrived aboard Essex in September 1944 with 247 flight hours and 0 combat experience. The squadron's veteran pilots assessed him quickly and accurately. He was careful, competent, and likely to survive if he followed orders and avoided taking unnecessary risks. They assigned him to fly wing position, following more experienced pilots, learning through observation and gradual exposure to combat. His first 10 missions were uneventful. He flew combat air patrol over the fleet, maintaining formation, scanning for enemy aircraft, and following radio instructions without deviation. He fired his guns twice, both times at extreme range against Japanese bombers that escaped into cloud cover. He claimed no kills, which disappointed no one. Wing pilots were expected to protect their section leaders, not hunt for individual glory. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. But Jimmy Crawford was learning. In the quiet hours between missions, he studied after-action reports from successful fighter pilots. He noticed patterns in their tactics, commonalities in their approaches. Most aces shared certain characteristics. They attacked from positions of advantage, they fired in short, accurate bursts, and they disengaged when the tactical situation turned against them. They were not necessarily better pilots in the technical sense. They were better tacticians. Jimmy began to see aerial combat as a problem of geometry and physics. Energy states, closure rates, deflection angles, these were calculable variables, not mysteries. He sketched diagrams in his logbook, mapping attack angles and escape routes. He memorized the performance characteristics of Japanese aircraft, the Zero's turning radius, the Oscar's rate of climb, the Tony's diving speed. Knowledge, he believed, could substitute for natural aggression. Fighter doctrine in late 1944 emphasizes altitude advantage and coordinated attacks. American pilots are taught to fight in pairs, using boom and zoom tactics that exploit the Hellcat's superior speed and firepower. The standard approach is methodical. Climb to altitude, locate enemy aircraft, position for attack, dive with speed advantage, fire a quick burst, and extend away before the enemy can respond. The doctrine works, mostly. Hellcat pilots maintain favorable kill ratios throughout the Pacific campaign, but the tactics require strict formation discipline and aggressive leadership. Wing pilots like Jimmy are expected to follow, observe, and learn. They are not expected to initiate attacks or break formation without explicit orders. This conservative approach saves lives but limits opportunities. Many promising engagements are abandoned when enemy fighters turn to fight rather than flee. American doctrine prefers certain kills to risky maneuvers. Wing pilots often return from missions having fired no shots, having engaged no targets, having learned nothing except how to maintain position and follow radio calls. The problem becomes more acute as Japanese tactics evolve. By November 1944, surviving enemy pilots understand American preferences. They exploit the Hellcat's reluctance to engage in prolonged turning fights. They use terrain and weather to break up American formations. They attack from below, forcing American fighters to dive toward the deck, where altitude advantage disappears. Squadron commanders recognize the problem but offer no solutions. Formation discipline cannot be compromised. Standard attack procedures have been validated by thousands of combat hours. Individual initiative, while occasionally successful, more often leads to tactical confusion and friendly fire incidents. The official guidance remains unchanged. Follow doctrine, trust your leader, shoot when you have a clear advantage. Jimmy Crawford reads the mission reports and sees a different pattern. American formations regularly encounter enemy aircraft at disadvantageous angles or altitudes. Standard doctrine requires maneuvering to gain tactical advantage before engaging. But maneuvering takes time, and time allows enemy aircraft to escape or call for reinforcements. Many potential kills are lost to procedure. He begins to wonder what would happen if doctrine could be bypassed entirely. What if a single pilot, properly positioned, could attack immediately upon contact without waiting for formation setup? The idea is tactically unsound and professionally dangerous. Wing pilots do not initiate independent attacks. But Jimmy files the thought away, along with his growing collection of after-action analyses and tactical observations. The mission briefing on November 17, 1944, calls for a standard combat air patrol over the northern approaches to Leyte Gulf. 8 Hellcats will launch at 0630 hours, climb to 18,000 feet, and patrol assigned sectors for 2 hours before returning to the ship. Enemy contact is possible, but not expected. The weather is clear, visibility unlimited, winds from the northwest at 15 knots. Jimmy Crawford conducts his pre-flight inspection with characteristic thoroughness. He checks control surface movement, verifies fuel quantity, tests radio equipment, and examines ammunition belt feeds. His Hellcat, Bureau number 58312, shows 174 combat hours and no major maintenance issues. The engine runs smoothly, the hydraulics respond normally, and the gun sight tracks properly. Everything is by the book. The launch proceeds without incident. 8 Hellcats roll down the Essex's flight deck, lift into the morning air, and form up in standard cruise formation. Jimmy flies wing on Lieutenant Hansen, a veteran with 11 confirmed kills who has survived 7 months of combat through careful planning and conservative tactics. They climb steadily toward their assigned altitude, throttles set for maximum cruise efficiency. Somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 feet, Jimmy makes an error. His altimeter is reading correctly, but he misinterprets the briefed altitude. The mission card calls for patrol at 18,000, but Jimmy reads it as 8,000. He begins a gradual descent while the rest of the formation continues climbing. The error is subtle, progressive, and goes unnoticed for several minutes. By the time Jimmy realizes his mistake, he has descended to 8,000 feet, while his squadron orbits at 18,000. 10,000 feet of vertical separation in an era before reliable radar coverage means he is effectively alone. He keys his radio to report the error, but hesitates when he spots movement below. 6 Japanese aircraft circle in loose formation at 5,000 feet. They are Zeros, distinguished by their sleek profiles and distinctive wing shapes. Jimmy counts them carefully. 6 fighters, no bombers, no escort. They appear to be conducting their own patrol, possibly protecting a larger formation nearby. They have not spotted him yet. Standard procedure requires Jimmy to climb back to formation, report contact, and await instructions for a coordinated attack. But climbing will make him visible to the enemy fighters. They will scatter or call for help. The opportunity will be lost, and Jimmy will face questions about his navigation error that could end his combat career. He considers his tactical position. 6 enemy fighters at 5,000 feet, unaware of his presence at 8,000 feet. He has altitude advantage, surprise, and clear fields of fire. The geometry is perfect for a lone wolf attack, exactly the scenario doctrine prohibits, but tactical reality sometimes demands. Jimmy checks his ammunition counter. 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total. Enough for sustained combat. The decision forms slowly in his mind. Not a conscious choice, more like a recognition of inevitability. He is here, they are there, and the mathematics favor an immediate attack. He rolls his Hellcat into a shallow dive, angling toward the rear of the enemy formation. His heart hammers, but his hands are steady. The dive angle is steeper than doctrine recommends. Standard boom and zoom attacks use shallow angles that preserve energy for escape maneuvers. But Jimmy's position requires a direct approach to reach the enemy before they scatter. He points the nose down at a 45-degree angle and pushes the throttle forward. The Hellcat accelerates rapidly. At 8,000 feet, gravity and engine power combine to build dangerous amounts of kinetic energy. Jimmy's airspeed indicator passes 300 knots, then 350. The controls stiffen. Wind noise increases to a howl. His vision begins to tunnel from G-forces, but he can still see the target formation growing larger. The Zero pilots react with trained precision. They detect Jimmy's approach and break formation immediately, turning in different directions to complicate his attack. 2 break left, 2 break right, 2 continue straight ahead. It is a textbook defensive maneuver designed to force the attacker to commit to a single target while others escape. Standard doctrine would require Jimmy to select one target, attack it briefly, and extend away before the others can react. But Jimmy realizes that his steep dive angle gives him a tactical advantage no one has taught him to recognize. His closure rate is so high that he can attack multiple targets before his energy bleeds off. Instead of committing to a single zero, Jimmy adjusts his dive to pass through the middle of the formation. He will attack the lead aircraft first, then use his remaining speed to engage targets of opportunity as they present themselves. It is an improvised tactic born from desperation and geometric necessity. The first zero fills his gun sight at 400 yards. Jimmy opens fire. 6.50 caliber machine guns converge on the enemy fighter's engine compartment. Tracers walk across the cowling and into the cockpit. The Zero shudders, rolls inverted, and begins a smoking dive toward the ocean. Jimmy's momentum carries him past the stricken aircraft and directly toward the second target. This Zero is turning hard left, trying to escape the attack, but Jimmy's speed advantage allows him to lead the turn and maintain firing position. Another burst, shorter this time. The Zero's wing root erupts in flame. The aircraft breaks apart at 4,000 feet. 2 down, for remaining, and Jimmy's airspeed is still building. The dive has become a controlled fall, gravity adding energy faster than air resistance can dissipate it. He pulls back on the stick to level off, but the Hellcat continues descending at a slight angle. He realizes he can maintain the attack as long as he has targets and ammunition. The third and fourth Zeros have broken in opposite directions, but Jimmy's trajectory will carry him between them. He selects the left-hand target, a Zero diving toward the deck in an apparent escape attempt. Jimmy follows, using his superior speed to close the gap. At 200 yards, he fires. The Zero's tail section disintegrates. The aircraft tumbles end over end before hitting the water. Now Jimmy faces a problem no training scenario has addressed. He has descended to 2,000 feet while attacking multiple targets in rapid sequence. His airspeed is still excessive, his altitude is dangerously low, and 3 enemy fighters remain active in the vicinity. Standard procedure calls for immediate disengagement, but Jimmy's energy state makes climbing away impossible without first bleeding off speed. The fourth Zero provides an unexpected solution. Instead of fleeing, it turns to engage Jimmy head-on. The Japanese pilot has recognized that the American fighter is trapped at low altitude and high speed, unable to maneuver effectively. A head-on attack eliminates Jimmy's energy advantage and forces a guns contest at close range. Jimmy accepts the challenge. He points his nose directly at the approaching Zero and opens fire at 800 yards. The range is extreme for accurate shooting, but Jimmy has ammunition to waste and the Zero pilot does not. Both aircraft close at a combined speed exceeding 600 knots. The engagement will last perhaps 2 seconds. Jimmy's stream of tracers forces the Zero pilot to jink and weave, disrupting his own aim. The Japanese fighters return fire passes high and wide. At 100 yards separation, both pilots break off simultaneously, passing each other at lethal speed. Jimmy checks his mirror and sees the Zero pulling up into a steep climb, black smoke pouring from its engine. A few seconds later, it rolls inverted and crashes into the sea. The fifth Zero attacks from Jimmy's right quarter, diving from above to regain the altitude advantage. But Jimmy's extreme speed allows him to turn inside the attack despite flying at minimum altitude. The Zero pilot misjudges the deflection angle and overshoots. Jimmy reverses hard, pulling maximum G-force, and places a short burst into the Zero's fuel tank. The explosion is visible for miles. One enemy fighter remains. Jimmy's ammunition counter shows 400 rounds expended, plenty remaining for a final engagement. But his fuel state is becoming critical. The high-speed maneuvering has consumed gasoline at an alarming rate, and he needs reserves for the return flight to Essex. The last Zero pilot demonstrates tactical wisdom. Instead of engaging, he turns away and flees at maximum speed toward the nearest Japanese airfield. Jimmy considers pursuit, but recognizes the futility. His fuel state prohibits extended chase, and a lone aircraft fleeing at sea level poses minimal threat to American forces. Jimmy begins a gradual climb back toward his assigned altitude. His hands shake slightly as adrenaline subsides and conscious thought returns. He has just engaged 6 enemy fighters simultaneously and destroyed 5 of them in less than 90 seconds. The tactical manual contains no references to such an attack profile. He has improvised a technique that should not work, executed it successfully, and survived to analyze the results. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The radio comes alive as Jimmy climbs through 10,000 feet. Lieutenant Hanson's voice crackles with concern and confusion. "Crawford, where the hell are you?" Jimmy keys his microphone and reports his position, adding that he has engaged multiple enemy aircraft and requires vectors home. Hanson responds with controlled profanity and orders Jimmy to rejoin formation immediately for debriefing. The rendezvous occurs over Leyte Gulf. 7 Hellcats form up around Jimmy's aircraft while Hanson conducts a visual inspection for battle damage. Jimmy's fighter shows scattered bullet holes in the wings and fuselage, evidence of the head-on engagement, but no critical systems are compromised. Hanson leads the formation back to Essex, maintaining radio silence until they reach the carrier's air traffic control frequency. The landing sequence proceeds normally until Jimmy traps aboard Essex and taxis clear of the landing area. Deck crews immediately surround his aircraft, counting bullet holes and examining damage. The plane captain, a chief petty officer with 20 years' experience, climbs onto the wing and peers into the cockpit. "How many?" he asks. Jimmy holds up 5 fingers. The chief whistles softly and signals for the armorers to check ammunition expenditure. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the squadron commander, arrives on deck before Jimmy completes his post-flight inspection. Hayes examines the aircraft personally, running his finger along bullet creases in the aluminum skin. He asks Jimmy 3 questions. "How many enemy aircraft?" 5 confirmed destroyed. "Any damage to your aircraft?" "Minor, sir." "Any injuries to personnel?" "None, sir." Hayes nods and walks away without further comment. The formal debriefing takes place in the squadron ready room. Jimmy sits at a metal table facing Hayes and the squadron intelligence officer. A stenographer records his statement in shorthand while Hayes refers to a tactical chart showing the engagement area. Jimmy describes the mission chronologically: the navigation error, the descent to wrong altitude, the detection of enemy aircraft, and the decision to attack. Hayes interrupts frequently to clarify details. What was Jimmy's exact altitude during the attack? Approximately 8,000 feet initially, decreasing to 2,000 feet at the conclusion. What was his airspeed? Between 300 and 400 knots throughout the engagement. How many targets were destroyed? 5 confirmed, 1 probable escape. What was the total engagement time? Approximately 90 seconds. The intelligence officer asks more pointed questions. Had Jimmy ever practiced this attack profile during training? No. Had he discussed similar tactics with other pilots? No. Did he consider the attack consistent with established doctrine? No. Sir, it was an improvised response to tactical circumstances. Hayes leans back in his chair and studies Jimmy for several seconds. Cadet Crawford, what you're describing is tactically impossible. A single fighter cannot engage 6 enemy aircraft simultaneously and survive. The mathematics don't work. You were outnumbered 6 to 1 with no altitude advantage and no support. You should be dead. Jimmy nods. Yes, sir. I understand that. Hayes continues, but you're not dead. Your aircraft shows evidence of combat. The ammunition expenditure matches your claim. And radar operators confirmed multiple aircraft contacts in your reported position that disappeared during the time frame you specified. He pauses. I'm going to recommend you for immediate promotion and reassignment to test pilot duties. Someone needs to figure out what you did and whether it's teachable. The recommendation travels up the chain of command rapidly. Within 48 hours, Jimmy receives orders to report to the Naval Test Center at Patuxent River, Maryland, for evaluation of experimental fighter tactics. He is promoted to ensign and granted priority air transport to the United States. His combat tour ends after 11 missions and 5 confirmed kills. The test program begins in December 1944. Jimmy works with a team of engineers and experienced test pilots to analyze his improvised attack technique. They call it the Velocity Dive Attack, or VDA, a tactical maneuver that trades altitude for airspeed to achieve multiple target engagement capability. The physics are counterintuitive but mathematically sound. Traditional fighter attacks use altitude to gain speed temporarily, then convert speed back to altitude during the escape phase. The Velocity Dive Attack sacrifices escape potential to maximize target engagement time. A pilot commits to fighting at low altitude and high speed until all targets are destroyed or ammunition is exhausted. It is tactically risky but potentially devastating against multiple enemy aircraft. Test flights confirm Jimmy's observations. A single fighter diving at maximum speed can engage multiple targets faster than they can coordinate defensive maneuvers. The key variables are entry altitude, dive angle, and target spacing. Too shallow an angle fails to generate sufficient speed advantage. Too steep an angle creates uncontrollable airspeed. Optimal results occur with 45-degree dive angles from 8,000 to 10,000 feet altitude. The technique spreads informally throughout the Pacific Fleet. Test pilots demonstrate the maneuver to squadron commanders during routine training exercises. Some pilots adapt it immediately, others find it too demanding physically or too risky tactically. But a significant minority incorporates velocity dive attacks into their standard repertoire, using the technique when tactical circumstances permit. Combat results validate the concept. Between January and March 1945, pilots using VDA tactics report improved kill ratios against multiple enemy aircraft. The technique proves especially effective against Japanese fighter sweeps that rely on numerical advantage rather than tactical coordination. American pilots who master the velocity dive can engage superior numbers with confidence, provided they accept the risk of operating at minimum altitude. Jimmy Crawford survives the war. He completes test pilot training at Patuxent River and remains in the Navy through 1946, evaluating jet aircraft and rocket-powered research vehicles. He logs 847 flight hours in experimental aircraft, including early tests of the F-9F Panther and F-H-1 Phantom jets. His evaluations emphasize safety and systematic analysis rather than aggressive testing. He approaches experimental flying the same way he approached combat, methodically, carefully, with complete understanding of risks and procedures. In civilian life, Jimmy works as an aerospace engineer for Douglas Aircraft Company. He contributes to the development of the A-4 Skyhawk and later the F-4 Phantom II, focusing on control system design and flight characteristics analysis. His colleagues know him as a quiet, competent engineer who understands pilot requirements because he has been there. He rarely discusses his combat experience and never mentions the velocity dive attack. The technique itself evolves with aircraft technology. Jet fighters of the 1950s and 1960s possessed sufficient power to climb rapidly after high-speed attacks, reducing the tactical risk that made VDA dangerous in propeller aircraft. Modern air-to-air missiles allow engagement of multiple targets without the close-range maneuvering that Jimmy pioneered. But the fundamental principle, trading altitude for speed to achieve temporal advantage, becomes incorporated into standard fighter doctrine. Training manuals of the 1960s include references to high-speed multiple target engagement, without mentioning its origins. Student pilots learn to recognize tactical situations where diving attacks offer advantages over traditional approach methods. The technique is taught as one option among many, not as a desperate expedient for navigational errors. Jimmy retires from Douglas Aircraft in 1984 after 38 years in aerospace engineering. He moves to Flagstaff, Arizona, where he builds model airplanes and teaches mathematics at the local community college. Students know him as Mr. Crawford, a patient instructor who explains complex concepts through practical examples. They do not know that their calculus teacher once fell out of the sky and changed fighter tactics for a generation. He dies in 2003 at age 80, survived by his wife of 57 years, 3 children, and 9 grandchildren. His obituary mentions his naval service and his engineering career, but provides no details about either. At the funeral, a retired Navy captain delivers a brief eulogy describing Jimmy as a man who solved problems through knowledge and courage. The captain does not elaborate, and most mourners assume he is speaking generally about Jimmy's professional life. The velocity dive attack disappears from fighter doctrine by 1960, replaced by missile-armed interceptors and beyond visual range engagement tactics. But its influence persists in more subtle forms. Modern fighter pilots train extensively in vertical energy management, learning to convert altitude into tactical advantage rapidly and decisively. The concept of trading positional safety for temporal opportunity becomes fundamental to air combat maneuvering. Computer simulations used in contemporary pilot training include scenarios derived from Jimmy Crawford's accidental discovery. Student pilots practice engaging multiple targets during high-speed approaches, learning to manage target prioritization under time pressure. They do not know they are replicating a technique developed by a navigation-confused cadet over Leyte Gulf in 1944. The deeper lesson transcends tactical specifics. Jimmy Crawford's contribution to fighter doctrine came not from superior piloting skill or aggressive instincts, but from his willingness to analyze unexpected circumstances objectively and act upon logical conclusions despite institutional skepticism. He approached aerial combat as an engineering problem requiring systematic solutions. His story illustrates how military innovation often emerges from errors, accidents, and improvisation rather than formal research programs. The most effective tactical developments frequently originate with junior personnel who lack sufficient experience to know what is impossible. Their naivety becomes an asset, allowing them to attempt solutions that experienced professionals would reject automatically. Jimmy's navigation error placed him in a tactical situation no training manual addressed. His response, diving into a numerically superior enemy formation, violated every principle of fighter doctrine. But his mathematical mind recognized that unconventional problems might require unconventional solutions. He calculated the odds, accepted the risks, and executed a plan that existed only in his imagination. The velocity dive attack worked precisely because it was unprecedented. Enemy pilots had trained extensively against traditional American tactics, but had no experience defending against solo diving attacks at maximum speed. Jimmy's technique succeeded through surprise as much as physics, exploiting enemy expectations to create tactical opportunity. Modern air forces understand this principle and deliberately cultivate tactical innovation. Fighter squadrons encourage pilots to experiment with new techniques during training exercises. Successful innovations are documented, analyzed, and disseminated throughout the force. The goal is to prevent tactical stagnation and maintain advantage over opponents who study American methods carefully. But institutional memory remains short. Each generation of pilots rediscovers tactical principles that previous generations learned through combat experience. The specific techniques change with technology, but the underlying logic persists. Altitude can be traded for speed. Speed can be converted to tactical advantage. Individual initiative can overcome numerical disadvantage under proper circumstances. Jimmy Crawford understood these relationships intuitively. He saw aerial combat as applied physics rather than ritualized violence. His mathematical approach to tactical problems produced solutions that emotional or instinctive responses might have missed. He proved that intellect could substitute for experience when circumstances demanded immediate action. His legacy is not found in medals or monuments. It exists in the training syllabi of fighter squadrons, the tactical computer programs that model aerial engagements, and the institutional knowledge that encourages pilots to think creatively about tactical problems. Jimmy Crawford gave military aviation something more valuable than a specific technique. He gave it an example of how careful analysis can produce decisive action even when conventional wisdom suggests failure is inevitable. The sky still belongs to those who understand it. Not just the physics of flight, but the mathematics of combat, the geometry of advantage, and the courage to act upon calculations when action seems impossible. Jimmy Crawford learned these lessons at 8,000 feet over enemy territory with 6 Japanese fighters circling below. His classroom was the Pacific sky. His textbook was written in tracers and aviation fuel. His final examination lasted 90 seconds and changed fighter tactics for a generation. Some innovations are born from genius. Others emerge from desperation. A few result from simple navigation errors that place the right pilot in the wrong place at exactly the right moment. Jimmy Crawford's contribution belongs to the latter category, proving that military history is shaped as much by accident as design, as much by junior personnel as senior commanders, and as much by individual initiative as institutional doctrine. The velocity dive attack is gone, but its spirit endures in every pilot who faces impossible odds and chooses calculation over panic, innovation over orthodoxy, action over hesitation. That may be the most important lesson of all. Not that specific techniques guarantee success, but that thoughtful analysis can create opportunity even when circumstances seem hopeless. Jimmy Crawford learned that lesson above Leyte Gulf in November 1944. He spent the rest of his life applying it to problems that had nothing to do with combat, but everything to do with finding solutions where none appeared to exist. Aviation is built on such moments. Not grand theories or billion-dollar programs, but individuals who notice what others miss, who test assumptions, who risk themselves to verify intuition. Jimmy Crawford didn't invent energy management. He didn't redesign the F-6F Hellcat. He simply observed, calculated, and trusted logic over fear. His navigation error became tactical innovation. His mistake became doctrine. His 90 seconds over Leyte Gulf became a permanent part of how fighters engage multiple targets. The mathematics of survival are written in moments like these. When training fails and doctrine provides no answers. When the odds suggest certain defeat and conventional wisdom counsels retreat. Sometimes the only solution is to fall toward the problem at maximum speed and trust that physics, courage, and careful calculation will provide an answer that experience never taught and imagination never conceived. Jimmy Crawford proved that such trust is not always misplaced. Sometimes falling is the only way to fly. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.